I'm Robin Currey, and I'm the Director of Sustainable Food Systems at Prescott College.
Hi, I'm Sharon Palmer. I'm a registered dietitian and I'm associate faculty at Prescott College.
So Sharon, your sustainable diets class is so interesting, and I'm excited that sustainable diets is part of what students in the food systems program are engaging in and learning about. And I can imagine that students taking the class are going to be really curious about how you came to be involved in the Master of Science in Sustainable Food Systems program and came to offer that course.
Yeah, well, I had the opportunity to get my master's in sustainable food systems at Green Mountain College in Vermont, which was a wonderful opportunity for me because I had always been very interested in sustainability as a dietitian in my work, and there's more and more interest in it among consumers. I would get more questions about it, and I became very passionate about it as a dietitian in my work. So it was really rewarding for me to go and get that the graduate degree through Green Mountain College, and I was really excited that that program found a home here at Prescott. So, and I was really honored to be asked to teach that sustainable diets course because I really think that it kind of adds that practical element of sustainability within eating patterns. So that's something I'm really excited about.
Yeah, so maybe you could talk a little bit more about that, because that's a question that students ask all the time, because clearly food is about the consumption part and the eating part of it and the nutrition part of it. Otherwise, we wouldn't be studying food systems, we'd be studying plant systems or animal systems. And so what are some of those ways that we can think about what we're eating and how that's linked with sustainability?
Yeah, I feel that right now our knowledge base on sustainability really shows us that what we eat could be one of the most powerful things that people as individuals could do when it comes to their own environmental footprint. So when we look at our eating patterns, it's so powerful, and we look at the overall food system, the way we're producing food, the way it's being cultivated, the entire food system from seed to plate has enormous impacts when it comes to environmental sustainability. So when we look at our style of eating in our Western diet patterns, it has a lot of impacts. When we look at the highly processed foods, our high fast food diets, our diets that are very high in animal foods, these have come with this burden of a higher environmental impact. So, there are things that people can do in their everyday lives, and understanding what those are in terms of food choices, food waste, kind of honoring more of a local food system, foods that are prepared in a more holistic way. Those are all things that we have an understanding could make a benefit.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you mentioned that, because it's not necessarily just the kinds of food. You mentioned the processing and the distribution and kind of tying into the more localized food systems. And I know that that's something that lots of our students in the sustainable food systems classes who are not dietitians are really concerned about and wanting to try to influence. So how to reduce the number of miles that food is traveling, from when it's harvested to when it's ending up on our plates. So there's some synergies I'm hearing from you between the interests of the dietitians and then the interests of some of the other students who are attracted to the MSFS program. Because as when you came and joined us, there were lots of folks from different backgrounds. I think, there were chefs that were in your cohort, and we still have folks who are involved in the preparation of food. We've had educators who come into the program, and we have folks who are more interested in business angle and bringing about change in food systems through entrepreneurship or for some of the organizations that they're working for. So I think it's one of the things that I appreciate is that there's synergies amongst students who are coming to the program from different disciplinary backgrounds. So I know you as a dietitian, and more dietitians have become interested in the Master of Science in Sustainable Food Systems. And I wondered if you might just speak to that a little bit, both from your own perspective and experience as a student who chose a sustainable food systems program, but also just in general, what's going on in the field of nutrition and dietetics that is sparking this interest in sustainability studies?
Yeah, I think there are several things going on. We have a lot of passionate dietitians who are interested in food patterns and eating patterns and how they impact the environment. So they just come right on board in their profession with that kind of passion. But I also think there are a few other things going on. For example, in the profession of dietetics, it's now going to be required that they have a master's degree. And it's a very intensive program to be a registered dietitian. A lot of people hear the term nutritionist, and people will use the term nutritionist, and maybe they just got like a little degree at their gym or something, and they're calling themselves a nutritionist. But a registered dietitian has a very specific track, and they're really the most skilled at the profession of nutrition and having that knowledge base. So now that the requirement is to have a master's, we're going to be seeing more dietitians looking for masters, and they can actually specialize in some of the things they're interested in their master's program. So I think we'll see more and more dietitians interested in pursuing a sustainability graduate degree as an option. And then another thing that is going on in the nutrition world is that dietitians are increasingly perceived as trusted nutrition advisors, health advisors.
I would hope so.
Yeah, isn't that? It's a really positive thing. You know, after all these years, when they do surveys, they find that among all the people that people are providing nutrition advice, dietitians are at the very top of the list for a respected, a respected source of nutrition information. So that's really encouraging. So that means dietitians have an opportunity to be the ones talking about sustainability. We're the ones that are actually talking to people, doing nutrition classes, having one-on-one education with clients, with patients. So who better to be the ones to provide, while you're talking about diabetes, why not provide a few sustainability messages? While you're talking about heart health, or school nutrition, or whatever it is, add a few of those sustainability messages. So it's a perfect marriage between health and eating, nutrition and sustainability.
So that leads to a question I've been wanting to ask you, even though we've known each other for all these years, is you're known as the plant-powered dietitian, and I never asked the question of how did you land on that title and nomenclature, and what was it that led you with your foundational training in nutrition to make the decision to dedicate your career to a more specific kind of diet, a plant-based diet?
Yeah, that's a great question. I was actually raised in a home that was semi-vegetarian. Yes, my parents, we were almost 100% vegetarian. My parents' philosophy, we grew our own food, we ate very healthfully. My mom baked her own bread, we canned our own produce. So we lived in this really kind of this natural, healthy environment. And then on top of that, I went to school at Loma Linda University for my undergraduate dietetics program, which I don't know if you've heard of Loma Linda as one of the blue zones. Have you heard of that? Yes. So Loma Linda is the only blue zone in the United States. And one of the facets of blue zones is that all of these places around the world where people live the longest, that's the blue zone, they eat a plant-based diet. So they found 5 blue zones. In the United States, it was Loma Linda, one in Costa Rica, one in Greece, one in Italy, Japan. I think I got them all. But the things that they had in common were that they ate a plant-based diet. And it was different forms of a plant-based diet. Some were really more plant-based, but overall they ate a diet that was based on local indigenous plant foods or in their community, and they had other aspects too in their lifestyle. So I went to school in the original blue zone, which happened to be a completely plant-based campus. The university, the supermarkets, everything were plant-based.
I hadn't put those together, those different pieces of information I had, and I hadn't put them together until you started mentioning that.
So I had this amazing opportunity to kind of have my plant-based journey keep going through my education, and then it was just it was more of what I was doing personally. But then when I started writing, about 20 years ago, I started I shifted my career to writing. So I was only focused on writing in magazines, and I wrote a couple of books, and then I thought, okay, now's my opportunity to really talk about what I want to talk about, which was plant-based nutrition. So that's how that evolved. I started really and that was about the same time that we started realizing all this research was really coming together, showing the benefits of a plant-based diet for health, for the planet, and there was a rising interest among consumers to eat a more plant-based diet. So it all came kind of at a good time.
So how well accepted are plant-based diets? I mean, amongst eaters and the consumers, but also, just out of curiosity in a clinical setting, so in hospitals, and how well is it becoming accepted, or still is it considered a little fringe still?
Yeah, there's kind of this discussion about what a plant-based diet really means right now. I mean, in my mind, a plant-based diet is a diet that's primarily plant-based. And that was really the discussion for many years among researchers. If they use the term plant-based, they were usually talking about a primarily plant-based diet. So the Mediterranean diet was a plant-based diet because it was primarily plant-based. But now that term has grown to be a little more confusing. You'll see some people define it as 100% plant-based or vegan. So there are different definitions, but I think most of our career as a dietitian, we've always been talking about eating. We may not have said plant-based, but we always encouraged people to eat whole grains. I mean, we've been saying to fill your plate with 3/4 plants for a long time, which is a plant-based diet. And we have a long ways to go in America. We're not eating that way, and the Western diet is not filling your plate with 3/4 of plant foods. In fact, the USDA found that only 12% of our calories are coming from plants, and only half of that is whole plants. The rest are things like nuts in almond bars or spinach and spinach dip. So only 6% of our calories are coming from whole plants. So we have a long way to go when it comes to that. So most dietitians are really rallying around in our nutrition world, like we have to get people to eat more of vegetables and fruits and whole grains and pulses. There's not too much debate around that in my world.
I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because clearly not everybody has access to that kind of information. Even people who care very deeply about sustainable food systems are coming to the study of sustainable food systems from their own disciplinary perspective. So, for example, my background is in agriculture and agroecology and biodiversity conservation and the conservation of different plant varieties that are used to be grown. So, we might be in a class together, right? With your disciplinary background and my disciplinary background, but all working towards a shared goal of having more sustainable food systems. So I think, I'm just kind of curious, and maybe you could speak to, what some of those, flagship recommendations that there might be coming from the nutrition perspective that could enhance food system sustainability, that folks coming to food system studies from other disciplinary backgrounds might want to prioritize, because the priorities may not always line up when you're looking through these different disciplinary lenses.
Yeah. Well, I kind of going back to plant-based, I think that's one of those flagship, and there's not a lot of debate. And we're talking about a primarily plant-based. We're not talking about 100% plant-based diet. But for example, the Mediterranean diet, that's the most researched diet pattern on the planet in terms of the number of studies that have looked at health benefits and health outcomes, and it's consistently shown to have positive benefits in terms of health, from reducing your risk of all sorts of chronic diseases. But now we're seeing more research on the sustainability of that eating pattern too. So that is one diet pattern that seems to have very little controversy and very, very accepted among the nutrition world and the healthcare world, and it's one that we could practice more, this idea of a more plant-based diet, more pulses, more whole grains, more fruits and vegetables. Fish is the main animal protein, healthy fats, And also part of the Mediterranean diet is more of a local food system. That's written into that whole plan too. So if you're in the Mediterranean, you're enjoying those tomatoes and the avocados and the things that are around you. But if you're translating that diet pattern to your own bioregion, then you look for the local food system that's around you too, focusing on some of these healthier ingredients. So that is one kind of a diet pattern that we've all gotten behind. Another thing that's really gotten a lot of attention is food waste, because dietitians are very engaged in practical advice to consumers, everyday life. How can you make your everyday life better? And food waste is kind of low-hanging fruit. And depending on the surveys you look at, somewhere around 40% of our food that's completely edible is being thrown away. And most of that is coming at the consumer level. So that is something that we could really make a difference. And when you think about all the resources that went to produce that food that's just being thrown away, and we also have this burden of food insecurity at the same time, it's just heartbreaking, right? So that is something, those are two big areas I think that that we all have some consensus around, we're all working towards in the nutrition world.
Yeah, so you mentioned, I was glad to hear you mention this bioregionality associated with diets, because really, as you know, sustainable diets are, diets that are environmentally, sustainable, have low impact on the environment and high impact in food and nutrition security. But as we look around the whole globe, we don't all have the same growing conditions. We don't all have the same soil type. And so, it just points out one of the challenges that, the nutritionists have, right? And the challenges that the rest of us who are concerned about food systems have about how to tailor our recommendations, tailor our research and tailor our recommendations to, the culture, but then also the ecology of the regions where we're living. So, we had an opportunity to talk about how there's different diets on the planet that have some of the same elements and components of, the Mediterranean diet. We're just all more familiar with that because, as you mentioned, it's gotten a lot of research and exposure because it's delicious also and more accessible to us in the, the northern hemisphere and more temperate growing conditions. But there are other dietary patterns that exist in different cultures and in different landscapes. And you mentioned that with the blue zones also, in Japan. So it's not that there's a one fit solution. From a research perspective, you start trying to dissect what those elements are in diets like the Mediterranean diets to try to replicate those elements that are providing the food and nutrition security, but in different ecological contexts. So it's been a fun conversation to have with you about that. Something else that people are always curious about, and it's something that, when people ask me about how can their diet impact climate change, or are they doing certain things currently in their diets that might be negatively, impacting the environment, often the topic of organically produced food will come up. And I always say, all things being equal, choose organic, because in addition to having a high proportion of the plant base that you mentioned, because we know that healthier soil also means healthier plants, and so less need for adding chemical inputs onto them. And there's emerging research about some of the concerns with some of the chemical additives. And I was just wondering what the conversations are in the field and in the profession about the role of organic production. Are those ongoing conversations?
Yeah, there's a lot of discussion about organic, and we do have our kind of organic research talking points within some of I'm involved in the Hunger Environmental Nutrition Dietetic Practice Group, which is kind of a subgroup of dietitians that are very interested in the environmental sustainability aspect of nutrition. And these are evidence-based messages around organic. And I love what you mentioned about soil health. To me, that's so important. And a lot of people just don't know about soil health and how organic cultivation is really more honoring the protection and the nourishment of the soil rather than just, looking at these isolated inputs that we're putting into the soil as you would find in conventional agriculture. And then pesticides are getting a lot of attention, whether it's environmental consequences or even human consequences. Even the bees, we were talking about colony collapse disorder and how increasingly it looks like the pesticides are being involved with harming the bees, which is important for pollination and our survival. So there's just so many aspects, but also there's dietitians are very engaged in food security. So there's always this question of food access to healthy food, and we need to get people eating more produce. So if only 9% of Americans are eating the recommended amount of vegetables, and if we're adding a challenge for them to choose organic, and studies are even showing that is a barrier, that's a concern, but it's something that's a challenge for us to figure out ways to make that healthy, safe food accessible for everyone. So that's a challenge, in the nutrition world, because we want people to have access to all of those helpful foods. So those are all things that we're working on, in our food system discussions.
Yeah. Well, and so as we know in sustainability studies and in sustainability careers, oftentimes our graduates are being trained for jobs that don't exist yet. I do not have a degree in sustainable food systems because that discipline and a systems-based approach to looking at things like agroecology and agricultural systems didn't exist at that time as a separate discipline. So I came at it from, a biology base and then also from an anthropology perspective. So sometimes we're training for careers that don't necessarily exist when students are graduating with their degrees. And I wondered if you might speak a little bit to your own career trajectory, because I don't know how many folks know that you have your own business in addition to being a faculty member here at Prescott College. But as I recently learned, you started your career working in clinical practice at a hospital here in Arizona. So, I think folks are curious about how they can build out their own jobs as the field evolves and as our circumstances evolve.
Yeah, I think there's going to be so many opportunities in sustainability, and I was sharing with you earlier that I see, I'm engaged with people now in my business where they have titles of sustainability in the nutrition world, whether it's working for a big food service contract company like Compass Group, that they have people actually in their organizational structure that are engaged in sustainability, and food organizations. In Kaiser Permanente, I see more and more people that are adding sustainability. I mean, they have farmers markets in some of their parking lots at Kaiser. Yeah. So, all across, this food system world, professions are starting to find ways to add sustainability. It's a very hot topic. But to go back a little bit about how I started, my first job was in a little hospital called Blythe, in Blythe, on the border of California and Arizona, because I went to university at Loma Linda, as I mentioned, which is in California. And that was my first job as a clinical dietitian in a small hospital. And then I went on to other jobs in dietetics. But I've had different jobs in dietetics. I had my own consulting company, and I even worked for a computer software company that did nutritional analysis programs. There are a lot of opportunities in the nutrition world. But about 20 years ago is when I wanted to start writing. So that was kind of my entry into starting my own business. I had always loved writing. So I took that skill and I started querying magazine editors. Because at that time, about 20 years ago, you could start seeing major magazines actually having articles about nutrition. Almost every magazine started putting something about food and nutrition, and they actually started asking dietitians to write these things. So that was kind of this career that I started nurturing, started writing, and then I was offered an editorial position, and then I wrote my books on plant-based eating. So that kind of made me, these days you have to have a blog and a website and social media if you're going to have a book. So that kind of led me in that direction. So since then I've been a nutrition advisor for different food organizations, and I do speaking on plant-based and sustainability and other topics, and then I'm very engaged in my social community and my blog. So it's been a really fun journey, and now doing more with my master's in sustainable food systems. So, associate faculty is really fun as well. Working on the sustainable diets curriculum and teaching that is a great experience for me too.
Yeah, well, we're so excited to have you engage with the faculty here for lots of different reasons. Because what I'm hoping is, because as I keep mentioning, there's so many skill sets that are needed to really rebuild sustainable food systems in the United States, but also globally. And as you know, I'm not a nutritionist by training, but I'm the biggest fan of nutritionists, and in my work in international development and applied development projects where you're working on on the ground interventions, especially in the realm of food security, then my closest partners in the work that I was doing in agriculture were the nutritionists and dietitians, because there is, the research. People are actually finally starting to do the research to look at the linkages between agricultural diversity and the combination of the plants that we're growing and our own dietary diversity. So anybody who's received that community supported agriculture, that CSA box, which for well, I know you know what they are, but you get this loads of different plants, and then your choice is either eat them and find a way to enjoy them, or they end up in the compost bin, right? And so people are more likely, the research shows that people are more likely to explore. So when, and try the foods, and then actually see that they quite like them. But even that kind of research has only been coming out within the last 10 years. And so it's one of those things that I think these partnerships amongst disciplines are so important for food system sustainability, and even the concept of sustainable diets, right? The foundational definition is that it's a diet with a low environmental impact, and so that right there means that we need the folks who are having the one-on-one conversations with their clients about eating and eating habits, but we also need all of the other partners who are involved in the production side and in the distribution side and in the food waste mitigation. So we're thrilled to have you on the faculty, and so pleased that all students have access to the important information that you have to share with them.
Yeah, well, I'm really excited about it too. I think that dietitians have such a great fit in the world that you just talked about. This is just all part of that conversation of helping people find these ways to change their lifestyle, their eating patterns. And we know that consumers are increasingly interested in sustainability. It's coming up in all the surveys. I read a survey recently that up to 80% of consumers are actually interested in sustainability when they make food purchases. So, but they can't define what that is. They're interested in it, but they don't know what that looks like in the shopping cart, in the shopping aisles, on their plates. And I feel like that's where the nutrition world can help kind of make those definitions and make those suggestions, and those kind of help them with their behavior and those kinds of changes that can make an impact. So It's exciting.
Yeah, but that's again where there's the partnership potential with all of the different stakeholders in the food system, because the burden is also on folks like those with the agriculture background on what is actually more sustainable, so that there's accurate information out there and available for then the interpretation and the recommendations at the client level.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's for sure. Yeah.
So a lot of work to do, but a lot of opportunities.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for having this conversation with me.
Thank you. It was really fun, and I'm really excited to be here at Prescott.